American English, American English, American English webinar series. Teach and learn. American English webinar series.
Hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar. We're excited to have you here. This is a part of webinar series 3 brought to you by the American English team here at the U.S. Department of State in Washington, D.C. Here you can see teachers in Bamako, Mali in a huge viewing group. This photo was taken during the first webinar in our current series. And I want to say a big thank you for the person that sent that in, which was Andrea Barbosa. We love to see all of you teachers learning together. So please, all of you people out there, continue to share your webinar viewing group photos by emailing them to americanenglishwebinars@elprograms.org. We may feature them in the next webinar. Here you can see the exciting schedule for this series. Our next webinar will be on June 15th, and it's entitled Student-Centered Classroom Management, Addressing Classroom Issues with 5 Adaptable Forms, and that will be presented by Catherine Thomas. And my name is Heather. You also know me as Moderator Heather, part of the American English team. You'll also see moderators Katie and Amy in the chat box, and we will all be here to support you during the webinar. As you know, our webinars each last 60 minutes, and they are related to a theme found on the American English website. The Teacher's Corner section from the website, shown here, features resources and lesson ideas related to the month's topic. The theme for this month, June, is Common Challenges in the English Language Classroom, and new activities related to that theme will be coming soon. You may notice that the American English website has a new organization scheme. The Teacher's Corner can now be accessed in 2 ways, from the rotating feature at the top of the homepage or through the English Teaching Resources section, both of which are highlighted by the yellow arrows that you see. Now let's take a look at how you're going to participate today. During the webinars, you're going to hear but not see live video of the presenter, and the way for you to participate is by typing in the chat box, as many of you are already doing. The chat box is where you can ask questions or make comments related to today's topic. We may not be able to answer every question during this session because there are often hundreds of great teachers participating. However, there is another place to ask questions after the session is over, the named community for teachers, and we'll take a closer look at that in just a moment. The presenter may also ask you questions in the form of polls. These multiple choice questions will appear on the screen for you to answer. Unfortunately, some people may experience technical problems during the webinar. We will let you know if we're having a global problem. If you do lose sound, you can follow along with the caption pod that you see at the bottom of the screen, and you can also try refreshing your internet browser to correct the audio problem. Each webinar series consists of 6 webinars, and during the series, webinars take place every other Wednesday. Those of you who attend at least 4 out of 6 webinars will receive an e-certificate from your regional English language officer or local U.S. Embassy after the series ends. To ensure you're eligible for that e-certificate, we're going to ask you to submit your attendance information at the very end of the webinar. And we will give you instructions for how to do that, and we will provide you with a link to fill out an online attendance form at the time requested. We hope many of you are already members of our named community. We have over 16,000 teachers participating in this dynamic community. If you haven't joined yet, please do. It might take up to 72 hours for your name registration to be approved, especially towards the beginning of a series. And here on the name, you can find resources and discussion questions related to each webinar, as well as all of the webinar recordings and featured materials. The Ning is also where you can ask the presenter questions after the webinar and live chat with your fellow community members. And before we get started, I wanted to point out one resource that's available to you on our Facebook pages, both American English and American English for Educators. I'm wondering if any of you have seen these infographics. That's a shortened form of the words information graphics. These infographics, such as the two examples you see here, usually deal with idioms and grammar topics. In this case, it's collocations. And these are topics that our students can find particularly challenging. You can digitally display these ready-made infographics in your classroom, or you can use them as the basis to make some hard copy materials to display in your class. Teaching students how to process this type of information is also an important part of digital and visual literacy, since infographics are very common today in online news stories. Once you've introduced infographics, you can challenge students to make their own related to any language topic that you're covering in class. So please do check them out on our Facebook pages. And now for today's webinar, Promoting Gender Equality in the English Language Classroom. In order to have a successful learning experience, it's essential that all students feel their classroom is a safe place where they will be treated equally. Unfortunately, research has shown that very often there is a disparity between the experiences of male and female students in the classroom, which can have disastrous effects. Luckily, there is a strong link between practices that promote gender equality between male and female students and general good classroom management. This webinar will explore techniques that will help you organize and facilitate a class in a way that's equitable for all your students. You will learn strategies and have an opportunity to apply them to a case study. And while the focus is on gender equity in the classroom, the techniques discussed can be used to create a learning environment that's inclusive of all student demographics. And I am very happy to introduce today's presenter, Philip Dierking. Philip began his career as an English teacher in France and has since gone on to teach and train teachers in Djibouti, Togo, Benin, Equatorial Guinea, and the United States. His interests include pedagogical issues in the under-resourced classroom environment, including teaching to large classes and gender equality in the classroom. Originally hailing from Juneau in the great state of Alaska, Philip holds an MA in TESOL from the University.
Well, hello everyone. My name is Philip Dierking, and welcome to the American English 3.3 webinar titled Promoting Gender Equality in the English Language Classroom. This is a topic that I personally find very important for the English teaching world, and I also find it very important for teachers of any subject anywhere in the world. And I'm excited to present this to you today through the American English webinar series. Before we begin, I wanted to take some time to talk a little bit about our lobby poll question we had for you in the very beginning, which was, in your English language classes, do males or females talk more? And it was interesting to see when I looked at the responses, it sounded like most of you, or the majority of responses, said that teachers felt female students talked more, and there were also a lot of people that found that it was equal. This is really encouraging, actually, and really great, especially because what a lot of research says is that in classrooms, if you look at classrooms all over the world, there is a tendency for male students to talk more. Additionally, what research shows is that whether or not a teacher is a male or a female, all teachers have a tendency to call on male teachers to speak more. However, that didn't seem to be the case with the responses I received in the polls. That's encouraging to know that there's so many of you out there that are finding equal participation in your classes. I'm really curious, though, for some of your answers. If we, just for a couple moments, if you could put why you felt this. Why did you feel that female students talked more, or why did you feel that it was equal? Feel free to write your opinions in the chat box. We have a few people typing questions. A lot of people are saying that equal, females, and some of our responses are saying how they find that the female students are very confident, they want to involve. Some are talking about natural abilities. Though we do have some other responses, some saying that it's conflicting. Some classes, males talk more. Some are saying males are more talkative, some are saying females are more talkative. And I think what's interesting looking at the comments is that how much this can actually probably vary across cultures too, whether males might be more confident in class, females might be more confident in class, depending the country, depending the context. So it's really encouraging to see such a variety in responses. Okay, well, let's continue on. I've asked for an opinion question. So now I'm actually going to ask you some factual questions about gender equality in the classroom. So please listen to the question and then the answers, and then choose the best answer for each question. Number 1, gender inequality is an issue that is relevant to A, only girls and women, B, developing countries, it's only there that gender gaps exist, C, all societies, women and men alike, or D, ministries dedicated to women's affairs. And it looks pretty overwhelming that most teachers are saying C, all societies, women and men alike. This is correct. Great work, everyone. When we talk about gender equality, it's important to know that we're not only speaking about women, but about men and women, and equality for everyone in the classroom. Excellent. Great work, everyone. Let's go on to question 2. Why are girls more likely than boys to miss out on secondary education in the developing world? A, because of high school fees, only boys go to school. B, many adolescent girls are expected to help out at home. C, child marriage restricts girls' mobility and freedom. Or D, all of the above. It looks like, from reading our responses, that we have the majority, well, it's looking about almost equal between B and D. And this is an interesting question because depending the country that you're from, there might be different obstacles. But if we're thinking globally, the correct answer is actually D, all of the above. Increasingly, adolescent girls face many economic and social demands that further disrupt their education, and any of these options can affect girls depending where you are in the world. Great work, everyone. We have one last question for you before we continue on. All right. It is estimated that 122 million youth globally are not literate. Of this number, what percentage are female? A, 50%, B, 36%, C, 77%, and D, 61%. Looks like most responses are saying C, but we also have quite a bunch that are saying D. And great, excellent. So the correct answer is actually D, 61%. But for a lot of you who said C, you're very close. The majority of illiterate youth are female, or there's certainly many more female than male. And this is important to know because, as we said, there is definitely a different experience for female students in the world with education than there are with male. All right, thank you very much, everyone, for participating. I really appreciated it. So let's continue with our presentation. So what I'd like to do before we begin is identify objectives. After this webinar, you will be able to, as participants, understand the importance of gender equality in English language classrooms. Practice identifying gender bias in classrooms. Understand how to establish an equal classroom learning environment. Discuss classroom strategies to promote gender equality. And lastly, identify gender bias in classroom texts or materials. And what I mean when I say gender bias is if one gender, if males or females are getting more treatment or more exposure in classroom materials than the other. Okay. So let's begin by talking about the definition of gender equality in education. What do we mean by this exactly? So according to a report by UNESCO, gender equality in education refers to boys and girls experiencing the same advantages or disadvantages in attending school, the same approaches and teaching methods, gender-neutral curricula, and academic orientation, and all of which aim to ensure equal learning achievement and subsequent life opportunities. So what we mean by this is essentially gender equality in education is about providing female and male students with the same education opportunities. So the opposite of that, gender inequality, is when female and male students do not have the same opportunities in education. So this is important because sometimes, or even often, gender equality is thought to relate only to women. However, it is in fact about both women and men. While women are deprived of equal access to education opportunities in more cases than men, we must also continue to look at and be careful for the inequalities and barriers to education that sometimes males and men might also face. And if we only focus on women, we get an incomplete view of gender, and we may overlook the discrimination that male students can also experience. So the important point to keep is that it's about equal opportunities for both. So the important question before we begin is, why is gender equality important for education? And before I suggest some ideas, I'm really interested in hearing your opinions as the audience. Why do you think gender equality is important for education? If you have ideas, please feel free to share them in the chat box. So we see some people, a lot of ideas are coming in, a lot of different thoughts. So again, the question is, why is gender equality important for education? So you have some ideas: democracy in education, people deserve to have the same opportunities, and it's for developing of the country. Sharir said to give equal chances to present their ideas. That is excellent. And one is not to subestimate either gender, exactly, not to have the same encouragement for both. Everyone has the same chances and opportunities to learn. Excellent. This is really great, everyone. These are great ideas. And I feel like everyone is right on point. So I'll share a few ideas. So gender equality is important for education because basically the opposite, gender inequality, can impact the ability of learners to access and fully participate in quality education. Barriers to learning will often be different for male and female learners who face different risks and have different needs. So sometimes these differences are very clear, but at other times they might be less obvious or even hidden. But as some of you noticed and mentioned in the chat box, providing men and women equal access to education is critical for breaking the cycle of poverty. So when I say that, how does this work? Well, to explain, basically, an educated individual is much more likely to grow up healthy and have better opportunities in school and for employment, have healthier children, and then be more likely to send their children to school and have their children get an education, and the cycle continues. This is especially important for women who, as we've learned, often have more obstacles when trying to achieve an education. So when all children, male or female, have equal access to a quality education, this can create a ripple effect of opportunity that influences generation upon generation to come. Okay. So what's important to remember is that promoting gender equality begins in the classroom and begins with the teacher. But what's fortunate is that many of the techniques you can do as a teacher to promote gender equality are very closely related as to the same techniques you would have to have good and fair classroom management in general. So this goes to show that a strong teacher is one that basically treats their students fairly and creates a classroom environment that is welcoming and fair to all students, regardless of gender. The best form of teaching is the most fair and most equal form of teaching. So one last important topic I want to talk about before discussing strategies is my idea of noticing as a teacher. Because it's important to talk about what we notice and what we observe in our class. I'm going to share a story about myself, actually. So when I was new to teaching, I was sometimes nervous about how I prepared my lessons, and when I would ask students questions in class, I was often worried that my students would not understand what I was asking or saying. And so because of this, whenever I asked a question, I generally would just call on the first student who raised their hand. However, what I started to notice over time was that it was only the same one or two students who were raising their hand every time for every question, and they were often always boys. I realized that because I was so quick to call on the first person to raise their hand, I wasn't giving the class time to think, and consequently they weren't ready to participate. So what I decided to start doing was whenever I asked a question, I counted silently to 5. After that, I would then call on students to answer the question. When I did this, I noticed that the amount of students who raised their hands to respond to my questions increased significantly. Now, this strategy relates to our topic of gender equality because once I began to notice my behavior as a teacher, which was always calling on students too fast, I also began to notice who is actually participating, and in my case, it ended up being mostly boys. So when I changed my behavior, this increased the number of students who participated and allowed me time to ensure that women and men were participating equally. This concept of noticing is very important to promoting gender inequality because we need to be aware of how we are teaching and how it encourages both males and female students to participate equally. So if you're interested as a teacher in being self-aware and reflecting on how your practices promote gender equality, there's a few tools you can use. One strategy is keeping a reflective journal where at the end of every class you take notes on what the participation was like in your class and how many men or males or female students are participating. You could also do this by making a chart of the gender interactions and participation. Maybe keeping a class list, and making checks by every time one participates or the other. And you can invite peer observers. So you can invite your fellow teachers to come and observe your class and give you feedback about how equal or how well you were calling on males and females or encouraging them to participate. Okay. Next, I want us to look at a case study because we have talked about what gender equality is and why it's important, but part of promoting equality in your classroom is being able to identify what inequality looks like. I'm going to read a description of a classroom situation, and I want you to think about what is happening in the classroom that is not equal. Specifically, I want you to think about your answers to these questions. Number 1, what problems are happening in this class? And number 2, what could the teacher do now to solve these problems? I encourage you to take notes while I'm reading, and then I'll give you a few moments at the end to be able to add your answers to the chat box. All right, ready? Let's begin. Okay, so the teacher of this class is a secondary school teacher who is teaching an 8th grade class. The ages are about 13 to 14, and there's about 40 students. All the male students sit together on one side of the class, and all the female students sit together on the other side. The teacher stands in one place at the front of the class and sometimes asks questions to the class. Whenever the teacher asks questions, the same 3 students, all male, usually answer all the questions. Sometimes the teacher calls on females to answer a question, but they usually refuse to answer or say they don't know. Whenever this happens, the male students laugh at the female students or make jokes. One female student will sometimes try to participate, but usually she is interrupted by a male student when she is talking. Okay, everyone, looks like we have several good ideas already. So one person said the seating arrangement, one said the students are separated by gender, another said lack of control. Lots of great ideas coming. Norma from Argentina also said the seating arrangement. So a lot of people are focusing on that, which is great. Clear domination by boys. Mariana mentioned bullying. Excellent. These are a lot of really great observations that you've had. You've noticed a lot of the important points. I'm going to share some of what I feel are the important points, and it looks like a lot of you have already guessed and mentioned some of these. So the important things to notice in this classroom situation, this is one that I've definitely observed before in my time teaching. First of all, the teacher is only calling on the first students who raise their hand, just like the example I gave of myself. The teacher is often only calling on male students. The teacher is not encouraging the female students to participate. The teacher is not disciplining male students for interrupting female students or laughing at them. And I just see that one comment was about respect, and that's true. There's a lack of respect, and the teacher is not intervening. And also, the teacher is not trying to make the class interactive or collaborative. All right, everyone, thanks for participating on that. So next question. What could the teacher do now to solve these problems? Please feel free to share your answers or your ideas in the chat box. All right. Give more participation to female students. Excellent. Mix the students up. Great idea. Martha says respect. Also really good. Ooh, another great idea. I didn't see who did it, but it was establish rules. Excellent. Call randomly. Manuel says apply noticing. Perfect. Well, I'm glad to see everyone's really picking up on what they need to be. Excellent. So just a few points. This is really great job, everyone. So just a few things that I'm going to mention, and a lot of them have been already suggested by the audience. Wait longer before calling on students to speak. Alternate more between calling on female and male students. Support and encourage female students when it's their turn to answer. Discipline students who interrupt other students or who laugh at them. Create more interactive or collaborative classroom exercises to accommodate students, male or female, who have different learning styles. Well, great job, everyone. Thanks for participating, and I will discuss all these ideas more thoroughly next. All right. Well, we've discussed what gender equality and inequality in education is and what it looks like in a classroom, so it's time to discuss strategies and techniques to promote an equal learning environment for both your female and your male students. And remember, one of the most important parts of gender equality is noticing what your actions are as a teacher and how they can affect your male and female students. So when promoting gender equality in your classroom, it's important to begin at the planning stages of your class and how your learning environment is organized. So gender bias can often be created through your verbal or nonverbal actions, and because of this, careful planning of your classroom can ensure that students of any gender feel equally supported. All right, so our first strategy. Hold equal academic and behavioral expectations of all students. This is an important point for promoting gender equality. To create an equal classroom, a teacher shouldn't try and make things easier for female students or their male students by necessarily giving them easier questions or trying to solve questions for the students. Rather, a teacher should hold the same academic expectations for their students, and they should give all students the same kind of help about how to go about solving a problem. Next, and this was an idea that I saw several of you mention in the chat box. Establish a set of rules or classroom norms for your students from the very beginning. This is, in my opinion, one of the most helpful steps you can take to create a classroom culture of equality. When you create a set of classroom rules for behavior, I also suggest for you to do this in collaboration with your students so that your students feel like they've also thought about what's necessary for respect and they've suggested it themselves. And you don't necessarily need to make specific rules about gender equality, but if you make your rules, or if you create rules that promote fairness for all students, you can then refer back to them throughout the class. So an example could be one common rule to create is how perhaps students should be respected when they're answering a question. So this way, if let's say a female student is answering a question and she gets interrupted, then you as a teacher can address the class and say, "Excuse me, is this following the rules that we created together?" Now, before we move on, I think what's really interesting about this topic is many teachers have done this and have different ideas, and so what I'm interested in knowing for all of you is what are some classroom rules that you think may encourage equal treatment of both genders. So think about this, and please do share your ideas in the chat box. What are classroom rules that may encourage equal treatment of both genders? So Kishab said rules should be made by students themselves in a participatory manner. I love that, working with the students to do this. Respecting everyone, excellent. Raise hand. Carmen says raise hand before speaking. Manuel says apply noticing. Participating together, respecting everybody, perfect. Give them the same opportunities to speak. Excellent. I'm seeing a lot of responses that talks about respect, and this is great. So really, really great ideas, everyone. Praising students who do well. Excellent. No interruptions. Great ideas. All great ideas. The important thing to remember is that if you're wanting to make rules specifically that promote gender equality, make sure that you have rules that address respecting your students, or students respecting each other, respecting the teacher, and participation in class. Because what's helpful is to let your class know that you do have the expectation that everyone will participate and that you will support everyone participating. Okay. Another important topic, and I think it sounds like a lot of you have mentioned this earlier in our presentation. If you find that perhaps all your male students sit together and all the female students sit together, this can sometimes affect participation of students. So make sure to have a classroom seating that enables equal participation. It's also important to be aware of students who are sitting in the back of the class. Research shows that teachers tend to interact the most with students who sit in the front 10 to 20% of the class. So if you find that you have perhaps a majority of your female students are not participating or sitting mostly in the back of the class, and perhaps are too timid to move to the front, you should consider trying to switch up your seating arrangement and mixing up how many, or at least making equal, how many female and male students are in the front. Now, this depends a lot on the schools you're in and the teaching context, and I understand that for some schools and contexts, using assigned seating is not an easy or an appropriate option. But if this is the case, you can overcome this by using a variety of desk arrangements, or you can use group and pair activities to get your students moving out of their preferred seats. We're going to talk a little bit more about that right now. So group work versus individual work. This is an important strategy for promoting equality because different students have different learning styles. And some students are just not confident expressing themselves publicly, but they might be if they were only talking to one or two other students. And also, it's important to know that sometimes female and male students can have different learning styles from each other. So because of this, it's very important to alternate your teaching style in order to engage all learning types in your classroom. So one way you can do this is to incorporate cooperative learning or group work in your classroom. And as we talked about in the last slide, group or pair work is a great way to get students to move out of their preferred seats, especially if you're trying to mix up where people sit in the class. Okay, we have a few other strategies I wanted to share. One, too, is to support and encourage both female and male learners to be class leaders, possibly having one female and one male as a co-leader of your class. Display posters on walls that portray female and male characters in equal numbers. And also, if you happen to have your students perform classroom chores, try to refrain from having students do tasks based on traditional gender roles. So one example is avoid having only boys carry heavy things or only girls clean the chalkboard. All right. So you've heard me suggest a lot of different ideas. Again, I'm really, one of the best parts about these opportunities for all of us teachers to come together is to share our ideas. And so I'm really interested in what you all have to say. And how else do you think you can create a classroom environment that supports equal opportunities for males and females? Please share your ideas in the chat box. So ask students to sit in a different arrangement every class week or alphabetically by name. I like that. Change seats frequently. Alternate responsibilities for students. Good. Mixing student groups. Group and pair work. Equal male and female teachers. If that's possible, that's also good. Great. Promoting teamwork and collaborative work. Excellent. Really good ideas. And that's the key is if you can create an environment in your class by taking the time to get to know students, using icebreakers, making students feel part of your class and the community, they will be much more comfortable participating as well. Mix them with the same roles and rotate the roles students have. Excellent. Great ideas, everyone. Great ideas. Okay, so we've talked about lots of ideas, both mine and yours. Please raise your hand if these ideas seem like something you could do in your classroom. Oh, we have a lot of hands going up. Excellent. Well, I'm really glad to see that many of you feel like you could use these in your classes. Great, everyone. Okay, you can put your hands down. So next, we're going to talk about classroom strategies. So after discussing what you do to organize your class, these are going to be ideas you can do while presenting and teaching in your class. Because one of the most important parts of promoting gender equality in the classroom is how you as a teacher are actually conducting your classroom. And depending on a teacher's behavior, students can either feel validated and incorporated into the class or unappreciated and discouraged. Fortunately, there are many strategies that you can use as a teacher to make sure that all your students feel validated. And as we said earlier, these strategies are meant to help a teacher with classroom management, and so they are closely linked with the same techniques a teacher would use for good classroom management anywhere. So we're going to have a quick poll, and you're going to see a list of different types of student-teacher interaction strategies. And I want you to select all the answers that you think will promote gender equality in the classroom of all these styles. All right, looks like we're getting a few responses. So A, calling on male and female students an equal amount of time has about 78%. B, giving male and female students equal opportunities to present work in class is about 53%, now up to 64%. C, providing equal praise to male and female students is at 44%, great. We have giving male and female students equally complex responses to questions is at 37%. And lastly, we have using gender-neutral language at 35%, excellent. Well, these are all great ideas, and actually, any of these, or all of these rather, are excellent strategies for student-teacher interaction, and all of these are great things you can do as a teacher to promote interaction. And in the next slides, I'm going to discuss each one of these. Thank you, everyone, for participating. Okay. So for the very first one, and we've talked a little bit about this already, student-teacher interaction, calling on or addressing both female and male learners a balanced number of times and for all subjects. So this is one of the most important actions you can do because one of the main opportunities students have to participate in a class is when they're answering teachers' questions. And unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, what research shows is that there is a tendency, and it's probably not intentional, and subconscious, but a tendency for both male and female teachers to initiate more interaction with male students and ask male students higher level questions. So if you're practicing noticing and being aware of your actions, you can address this. So a few things to keep in mind to improve on this is to don't call on the first student who raises his or her hand or yells an answer. And as I mentioned to you earlier, count to 5 before calling on students to answer. Keep a class list and randomly call names on your class list of students. You can also keep a list and put a check by each student's name after you call her or him. That way you can keep track of who's participating. You can alternate between calling on male and female names, or call on hand raisers only after encouraging all students to participate. And this is important because if you have students who are eager to participate, you don't want them to be discouraged by not calling on them, but if you've called on them a few times, then take a moment to call on other students first before always going to the students who raise their hand all the time. Okay. Also, make sure to give both female and male students equally complex responses to their answers. So no matter how strong or weak your students are, if they are making the effort to participate, they should feel validated for that, and make sure to make them feel like you're listening and acknowledging their answer. You can do this by nodding or saying even just small things like, oh, great, things that let them know that as a teacher, no matter how strong or weak their answer was, you're still validating that they put forth the effort. Also, provide equal praise to both male and female students. So the goal, and this is important because while the goal is to make sure that your praise is equal, definitely And so definitely be conscious of how often you're praising your students that are perhaps shyer in class. So if you find that your female students or maybe your male students are more timid and not participating as much, make sure that when they do participate, to give them praise, both publicly in front of the class and validate the effort they did, and also let them know after class as well. Okay, now another important one, which is a little more subtle of a behavior as a teacher, but is also very, very important, is using gender-neutral language. So sometimes in English there's a tendency to use male pronouns when referring to a group, and this unfortunately can make female students feel left out. So make sure to use a female names and pronouns as an equal amount as males in classes, exercises, or texts. You can do this by saying she or he or she, or they. One common scenario is by using the term guys in English when referring to a group, even if it's mixed gender. And if you do that, what I recommend is to avoid that and try replacing the term guys with everybody or everyone. And again, saying she or he instead of just he or they. Okay, again, I've talked about a lot of ideas right here, and I'm curious how, as the audience feels, they could use these in class. Please raise your hand if these strategies could be used in your class. Great, it looks like we're getting lots of hands up, so that is excellent. I'm excited to see that and know that this is helpful for all of you. So we're going to talk about a couple other ideas, strategies, and the next one is body language. So your body language will communicate a lot to your students, and teachers might not even realize that your body language is different with their female students than it is with their male students. And it's important to know that body language and nonverbal communication ranges from culture to culture. So you need to think about what is appropriate for your cultural context. But the important thing is to make sure your students feel like you're listening to them, whether they're males or females. So this can be leaning forward, making sure to not walk away while they're talking, and giving the appropriate nonverbal cues when both male and female students are talking. Also, make sure to not interrupt students. If a student is sharing his or her idea, let them finish their thoughts and not interrupt before you bring up another point. Now, another important one, and people have mentioned this, is move around the room or to different locations of class as you speak. So this is really important because students who sit in the middle of the back of the class have a tendency to not speak as much. And in general, students closer to the teacher are more likely to participate. So if you, as a teacher, can find a way to make your students physically closer, this can help increase participation. So I encourage you to move to different points of the class while you're talking, or go down to the middle to the back, and move around as a teacher. I always find for myself that if I move to other areas of the classroom, I can start getting more participation from that area. Now this is what other people have mentioned, and this is very important, is discipline. So teachers should definitely be very aware and basically ready to intervene when male students say put downs to female students, or when female students insult or put down male students. And this is especially important when if you have timid students, and if you find that your female students are timid or your male students, because if you have timid students and they are trying to participate and they're insulted, they're not going to feel motivated to participate in the future. So make sure that you're always watching for this. And as we talked about, this can be prevented by creating a class policy for respecting students. But even if you make that policy, if you have students participating and another comes in and insults or laughs at, you need to be quick to intervene and discipline and let them know that you're going to support the students who are making an effort to participate in class. But remember that the objective here is gender equality. So equal offenses deserve equal punishments, whether the perpetrator is male or female. So there are many strategies that you can be used and that we can suggest to promote gender equality, but here we're talking about some of the most useful. I have just a few others left. One is making sure to return to the remarks of students who start to speak but are interrupted or who drop their point before finishing. Give students the space to finish their thoughts and be aware of students whose comments are being ignored. And also emphasize male and female students' comments by putting them on the board. This is very important, especially for if you have timid students. If they do finally participate, make them feel good about that and make sure to acknowledge the good point they made and write it on the board. Okay, well, we've discussed strategies for creating an equal learning environment and how those are linked to the general teaching strategies. Let's look at an important area that often can sometimes be overlooked, and that is gender inequality in textbooks and materials. So before we continue further, I want to ask the audience about this one. Do you feel that English language textbooks and teaching materials are equal in how they portray females or males? So indicate yes or no. I'll give you a few moments to put your answers. So it looks like we have people still participating. Okay, well, it's moving around, but it looks like right now we have about 80% of people are. Excellent. Well, it's very interesting to hear all of your feedback because this actually it reflects what research says. So it sounds like most of you feel that textbooks are not equal in how they portray males or females. Great. Well, thank you for participating, everybody. So, as I said, many studies have found that many ESL texts contain stereotypes about women, underrepresent women, mention men first, or make offensive jokes about women. In addition to this, studies on classroom text have also found that men can make up anywhere between 57 to 80% of characters mentioned in books. And this is important because textbooks are found to be used by teachers as a core means of teaching in 70 to 95% of classroom time. So as teachers, this is really important for us because we need to make sure to always review our materials, even if we don't have any other choice, to know how effectively they're promoting both genders. If we have the choice, it's great to select materials that are fair, but if we don't have the choice, there are things we can do. Okay, so I want to take us through a quick exercise before I suggest some ideas, because part of noticing inequality in text is knowing what to look for. So I'm going to give you an image from an actual ESL textbook. It's a picture. And I want you to briefly examine this image. And I want you to think about how the men and women are being portrayed in this text. So I'll leave the image up for a few seconds, and I want you to take notes, and I want you to share your ideas in the chat box. What do you notice about how the men or the males and females are being presented in this image? So here's your text. Take a few moments. Okay, so we have some ideas. More men being mentioned. Men playing traditional roles. Men are the only ones who have professions. Isadora says men are working outside of the house where females are more domestic. Other ideas are this is playing up to job stereotypes. And then Isadora also said women and men are in traditional roles. And Alejandra said men have more of the paid jobs. Excellent. So this is great observations, everyone. Great observations. And so, and again, remember, this is an actual ESL text. And so a lot of you mentioned this already. But a few things I want you to notice is that, as you all said, the women are being portrayed in gender stereotyped jobs. And also so are the men. Most of the women pictured do not have jobs as high of a level as the males do. And the men are pictured. The men are pictured more frequently than women are. Excellent. Now, this is really important because if your students are reading these textbooks and materials and they're finding that men are portrayed in higher level jobs or more frequently, that can have an effect on what female students feel as far as their opportunities in life or their chances of success or what kind of jobs they can aspire to. So what I encourage everyone to do is when you have your materials is to create a checklist and have a few ideas of what are important to include on that checklist. So when you review your materials, look to make sure that are the materials and resources used by you or your students free from gender stereotypes. Do the teaching and learning materials portray girls and boys with equal prominence, respect, and potential? Does the curriculum reflect the needs and life experiences of both males and females? And does the curriculum promote peace and equality for boys and girls regardless of their race, class, disability, religion, or ethnic background? So really quick, I'm interested to know for all of you, can you raise your hand if you feel that you could use this checklist in your class? So we have a lot of hands going up. Great. Really glad to see that. Excellent. You can go ahead and put your hands down. Now, if you find that your materials that you are using are not depicting females or males equally, there are some suggestions that I have for what you can do to affect this. And it's important for me to note that I understand that not all teachers, depending where you're teaching, will have the option of using different materials than what is mandated by the school or the national policy. And this is probably a common reality for many people. If this is the case, there are still some strategies that you can use to adapt your materials to make sure you're including females and males equally. So making sure to ensure that with what you do use or supplement that they have equal numbers in your class materials. Ensure that the themes, subjects, and pictures used in class materials are relevant to the life experiences of both female and male students. Ensure that female and male students are not just depicted according to stereotypes. And ensure a gender balance among authors. Other things you can do are to supplement ESL texts by including writing or work by or about women, cite women as well as men as authorities about various topics, and adapt your materials when necessary to include more images and stories about women. Excellent. Now, as I said, you'll have to work, and for this particular area, you need to work in the context of what's available. But I really encourage that if you are not allowed to choose your textbooks, then if you find in your textbook, your exercises, your exams, if there is an unequal amount of time, if men and women are not represented equally, or are not represented, or only represented in stereotypes, feel free to create some of your own materials that you can add in your own, whether it's reading or writing samples, or just changing the names of people in the class or the jobs that they have of the exercises. And this will go a large way to making both students feel valued and feeling like they have equal opportunities. Okay. Well, let's review what we've talked about today. We're almost out of time. But today we discussed the importance of gender equality in English language classrooms. We practiced identifying gender bias in classrooms. We learned how to establish an equal classroom learning environment. We discussed classroom strategies to promote gender equality. And we identified gender bias in classroom texts or materials. I personally feel that if, as teachers, we can all make sure to keep all of these factors in mind and constantly watch for our own noticing or notice our own actions as teachers and how we're affecting our students, that can go a long way to creating an environment where both your male and your female students feel validated and willing to participate. So here I have a quick reference list, and these were materials that I used to help develop this presentation. And they're all excellent resources for all of you to look at and read through and consider for learning new tips for promoting equality in your classrooms. In particular, the second one, the Gender Network in Asia Pacific, Promoting Gender Equality in Education, has some great tools and strategies that you can use as teachers in your classrooms to encourage an equal classroom environment. So I wanted to say to everyone, first off, thank you for attending. It was a pleasure and an honor to speak with you about this very important topic. And I look forward to seeing you on the Ning, where we can discuss ideas or I can answer questions that you may have, and is where you can also find additional documents about this topic uploaded. Now we only have just a couple minutes left, and I was interested in knowing if there's any questions left from the audience that I could possibly answer. Well, we have a lot of great comments, not so many questions, but a lot of folks sounding like they found this very useful. It's great to hear. Excellent. Well, it sounds like most people are finding that this is very helpful and that they can use these in their class. I'm happy to know that, and more than happy to communicate with all of you further on the Ning about this topic. And I wanted to leave you with one last quote, and this is by Kofi Annan, who is the former United Nations Secretary General. And he says, "Gender equality is more than a goal itself. It is a precondition for meeting the challenge of reducing poverty, promoting sustainable development, and building good governance." So I'll leave that with you, and I'd just again like to say thank you all for your excellent participation, and it's been a pleasure to speak with you about this.
Thank you so much, Philip, for addressing a sometimes overlooked but extremely important topic in the EFL classroom. I appreciate that you addressed the classroom environment, classroom management, and the course content dimensions of gender equality. And I really think you offered a lot of practical ideas for making this an ideal a reality in the classroom. I know that we all look forward to exploring the helpful resources that you've shared on the Ning too. So thanks so much, Phil. Great webinar. I also want to say a big thank you to you, our audience out there, for your amazing participation today. A lot of great comments and good points brought up in the chat box. And we look forward to continuing to learn with you in Series 3.